introduce you to my friend Fricke, whom I've worked with for a long time. He knows a great deal about energy, and he's here to share some of that with us tonight. Welcome, Craig. He's also a very good manager. He's been managing me for a long time.
Thank you, John. I'm so happy that you welcomed me onto your campus. It's going to be fun tonight. I'm going to try to keep it light. Energy is, by its very nature, quite boring. None of my family and friends over my 41-year career really talked to me about what I did because it wasn't that much fun. So I will try to bring it a little bit light tonight. The first question, before we get going, I need a little audience engagement. So, I just want to know what you think the percent, I'm an engineer, so we're going to start with a number. What percent of all of the energy in the United States that we produce, what percent comes from renewable energy sources? And for a definition on that, obviously we have solar and wind, hydroelectric, and we have biomass and ethanol. So when you think about all of the renewable fuels, what percent, just write that percent on the card. You know, if you know it, wonderful. If it's a wild guess, I'll take that too. Yep, just write it on the card. And when you get that written down, don't put your name on it. I'm not going to pick on anybody. Just pass it this way, and maybe Lindsay can help get them all collected. And we'll give the results. We'll give the results back in a little bit.
These are just empty.
But I do want to, during my career, I was rarely able to bring my wife with me, so I want to introduce my wife, Darla. And so it's fun to have her with me tonight. She has not seen any of this, so it's going to be a complete surprise. She won't have a clue what's going on. I won't tell her. I want her to be surprised too. So last week, we celebrated 43 years, so we're excited about that. And 44 years ago, this month, we met. We met in Ames. I fell in love in 44 seconds. It took her about 4 months. But here we are, here we are. Do we have anybody who has a degree from Iowa State University? We have one? We're it? Are we it? Shake your hand.
We have a son-in-law.
Oh, okay, good, good. Well, I did graduate from Iowa State in 1979, and Darla then transferred here after we got married and finished up at U of I with her accounting degree. So that's where we came from. I grew up on an Iowa farm, northwest of Ames by Fort Dodge. I'm sure Gowrie was the actual name of the little town that I grew up in. I also have to take the temperature of the room to ask about, are there any music teachers or choir people here? Choir? Oh, good. I might lean on you a little bit. I'll tell you when. I'll get you all queued up. Do we have any CPAs in the room? Any certified public accountants? No? Okay, well, I won't worry about them. Do we have anybody with medical training that can read an EKG? Well, I won't worry about that either. I got one. Okay, so we've got the choir people figured out. Did all the, you've got them all? Okay. So now, could we do the handouts? Oh, there's some more, okay. Now we can do the handouts. And when you get that, if you can just flip it over so the graph You can be looking on that side. Hopefully it'll be lining up in here for you to, I just want to read 5 things on there to kind of prime the pump here about the topics we're gonna go over. So down on the chart in the lower left, you'll see that the real number for renewables is 12%. 12%. Anybody get it? Nobody got it. Okay. Close. All right. Good. The other thing I want to cover on this sheet before we move on then, at the top of that sheet, I've got web searches if anybody wants to dig deeper. Like any profession, we all have our own jargon. And so what I've done is I curated some things over the weekend. If you want to dig into this stuff, these are the words and the jargon that you would put into your search engine if you want to learn a lot about any of these topics. But the ones up on the top are what we're going to cover tonight. Why is the U.S. electric grid so fragile? We're going to get into that. We're going to talk very little, but I want to talk about the February 2021 Texas power outage that happened. Everybody heard about that. What is accredited electric generation capacity? What are the barriers to rapid deployment of battery storage for wind and solar projects? And how many years are required to design, permit, and construct large wind farms or solar farms or large high voltage transmission? These are all critical questions that are on the forefront of my mind, even though I'm not in the business anymore, but it's still interesting to follow it. So with that, does anybody have any idea about my 4-digit number? Is it my bank card pin? Is it the last 4 of my social? How many people care about that number? Every day. Nobody here. Oh.
Well, I'm just caring because it's obviously a nice surprise.
All right. 7.8 million people here in the United States care a lot about that number. That's how many hours there are in the year. My whole career I cared about hourly use of energy. Every hour matters a lot. I'm keeping the electric grid up and keeping it reliable. That title I thought was quite boring. This is the real title for my presentation. I'm not sure, but it seems that we may be in a little bit of a pickle, Dick. Anybody know where that came from? It came from a movie, 2005. Let's check it out. Who's that? Jim Carrey?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Going through our finances.
A little louder? You're on it already. Okay?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Going through our finances. I'm not sure, but it seems that we may be a little bit of a pickle there.
Darla and I use that. We went to that movie in 2005. A little louder now. And in our daily life, we bring that up every while. We're going to be in a little bit of a pickle. And I would say that working title for this presentation is where we're at with our electric grid. We're not anywhere near where we used to be in terms of being able to make sure it's reliable. Now, this is just a preview. I'm not going to end up with this kind of detail all the way through. But we today don't have enough electric capacity to cover all of the situations that might come up. We're really hanging on the thread in terms of being able to keep the lights on, especially in July and August, and in the dead of winter. We really don't have an extra margin of reserve capacity anymore. We've retired a lot of coal plants. We've retired some of the older natural gas plants. We've retired 10% of our nuclear power fleet. All this stuff has happened in the last 10 years, and it's really beginning to come up and bite us. We're really beginning to have some trouble with that. The power plants we have left, many of them are getting older, and they're prone to what we call unplanned outages. They just go down because they're mechanical pieces of equipment, and they go offline. We also have the federal government, and believe me, no politics, not going there. Over my career, I've been just as happy with Republicans and Democrats, and just as angry with both of them all the way through, relative to energy. But right now we have this growing electrification with electric vehicles and electric heat. That doesn't really bode well with all of the other things that are currently going on in the electric grid. Now, the other thing I really have to remind you of, I'm coming back because John and Mary Jo invited me back, and honestly, 6 months ago when we were having dinner, I said, no, I don't want to come back. I've been retired now for 3.5 years, and when I retired, I went cold turkey. I stopped reading all of the industry jargon and all of that. Within 30 days, I was all done. And I never thought about it until Mary Jo and John said, hey, Greg, can you come down and talk? And I said, no. It's going to take too much effort to get back up to speed after 3.5 years. And then in 2 weeks, I kind of felt guilty. And the farm boy in me said, don't let people down, do the work, get her done. And so I came back in 2 weeks and said, I'll do it. But I wore this shirt to remind me that I really am retired. And if you give me questions, I'll do what I can. I'll do my best to give you guidance or direction about how to think about a topic. I'm not a walking encyclopedia.
This is an easy question. What exactly was your job? What did you do?
Oh, okay. Did any of you drive in the 1970s? Did any of you go down Highway 30 west of Ames, and there were some windmills out there? Some of you are shaking your head. I was an intern for the United States Department of Agriculture. I worked for a professor as an intern, and my job was to keep the windmills going out on the farm west of Ames, and take care of all of the circuitry that we had involved out there. Then I graduated and went to work for an electric cooperative over here in Wilton, Iowa. I designed high voltage transmission lines at that point, and after 2 years I transferred to Central Iowa Power Cooperative. We provide power for 58 counties throughout Iowa, and in that job I was responsible for planning all the power supply and leading my team to get that done. When I retired in 2012, I had been promoted and had been in the position for about 8 years of Chief Operating Officer. So we were responsible, my team, for the planning of generation and transmission to keep the lights on for 58 counties. Does that help a little? Thank you for the question.
Then after you retired the first time.
Yep, I'm going to get to that.
Oh.
Then I had another gig. I retired in 2012, and then I worked 7 more years on the flip side of the equation, which I'll introduce here in a moment. But one more question. A mandatory tour on a cruise ship. I need a show of hands. You have to pick one or the other. If you go on a cruise ship and you want to take a tour behind the scenes, how many would rather go on the bridge versus the engine room? And I need a show of hands first on the bridge. Okay, about half. How about the engine room? Wow, cool. We're evenly split. I've got something for everybody. We're going to look at some bigger picture stuff, We're also going to go into the engine room and get into a little bit of detail. I'll try to be as quick as I can and not lose your attention, I hope. We'll see how that goes. Here I am in 1990, working for Central Iowa Power Cooperative. We owned a small coal-fired plant halfway between the Quad Cities and Muscatine. The coal that we bought on contract came from Peabody Coal Company, about an hour east of St. Louis. So I'm in the coal mine, about 200 people on ground level at that point, getting a tour of that coal mine from the people we bought that coal from. I only bring that up is because nowadays it's not that acceptable to be working in a coal plant or the coal industry, but that's what we did back then. Now we'll go 328 feet above ground level. We're in northeast Iowa, near Edgewood, Iowa. And here we're looking out over the top of the turbine. At that time when this farm was constructed, it was the tallest turbines in the state of Iowa. 100-meter high turbines, which is 328 feet. They were also the biggest generator. We had 2.5 megawatt generators, and we had we did have 17 wind turbines on that particular farm. Typically, back in 2011, this would have been a 1.5 megawatt unit, and that would have been 80 meters. But as Darla reminded me, I went to work for this company in 2012. In 2011, I negotiated the contract for my power company to buy the power output from that farm, 20-year contract. And so at this point, I'm on the buyer's side of the equation. On that day, it was quite cold and windy. Of course, we're at a wind farm, it's going to be windy. It took me over 30 minutes to climb the ladder. Inside of the tower, I had a harness on and a cable so that if you passed out or slipped, you would get caught on the cable. But I was kind of disappointed because I wanted to go out and stand on the deck, maybe like on the Titanic, and reach out. And we were able to do that if it wasn't windy, but that day it was too windy. So they wouldn't let me get out and go up on the deck of the wind turbine. Inside, these are the two technicians that gave me the tour that day. Just to give you an idea, the area up there where the generator and the gearbox is located is about like a small single-stall garage. That's about how big it is. It's pretty cramped in there. And that's just a beautiful picture. Where I grew up, the roads went really straight, the land was really level. We didn't have contours, so that's a beautiful, beautiful picture. Okay, just briefly, John, this is John's fault. He gave me a technique, and he said, if you want an audience to get involved, you just do that. And if you were at a workshop, I would break you up into small groups of like 5 people, and you'd go off and you'd work for 20 minutes and then come back and report your small group outcome to the larger group. So just what comes to mind when you think about energy security? Anybody?
Blackouts.
Blackouts? Ukraine? Absolutely. Top of mind right now. Anything else?
Above ground lines,
I'm sorry?
above ground lines.
Oh, okay. Electric transmission lines above ground. Yeah. Because weather can take them out. Good, good. Bad guys, like Ukraine. Yeah. It can be a real target. Yeah. Well, I set up my computer over the weekend and I did a mind dump and I thought, what do I think about when I think about energy security? And I thought about, first and foremost, very selfishly for myself and my wife, I really care most about water, food, and shelter, don't we? That's what we really care about. And without electricity or natural gas coming into our homes, we're kind of out of luck. mentioned, enemies in Ukraine. That's right there at the top. All of this stuff gets impacted in a very negative way if we don't have continuity of our energy supply. I'm probably because I grew up on a farm too, I want to be very independent, but I really believe that we as a country need to be independent with our energy resources. If we're not, if we rely on someone else, we're going to be vulnerable, and we're going to become a target, and we're not going to have the economy that we really want over the long run. There's one other thing though. Does this ring a bell? You got it, right here on campus.
Yes, we do.
That's right. In fact, that's exactly the one that you have on campus. It's a culvert. And you can feel rest assured that you're going to be able to keep the lights on and your fridge going and your, all of that stuff going. With one exception. What exception would that be? This is part of energy security. Fuel, natural gas. If that fuel supply doesn't come in for whatever reason, you're out of line. Yep, exactly. Thank you. So my most common question I get when you're driving down I-80 and you're looking out over a wind farm and the blades are not spinning, well, why aren't they spinning? There's a lot of reasons why that wind farm may not be producing energy on any given day or on a given hour. Well, obviously, if the wind doesn't blow enough, you're not going to have generation. We have to have about 7 miles per hour of wind to get the turbines moving. If it blows too much, they feather the blades and they stop them because it'll ruin the machine if it's in too windy of an area. So at 40 miles per hour, more or less, we shut them down. And so that's a couple of reasons why that turbine may not be rotating or spinning. You can have maintenance. There's a lot of things that can go wrong inside of the turbine. And so there's a lot, the two technicians, they're always working every day to keep those going, and they can be shut down for a maintenance problem. We can have literally a transmission line problem or a constraint on a high voltage network that could be 50 miles away from a wind farm, and that constraint might cause that wind farm to have to be shut down so we don't overload a power line somewhere else in the region. Nobody thinks about that, but it does happen. Ice build up on the blades. On the days when you have just a little bit of mist on your windshield and you're barely keeping it off with the defrost, we shut it down. They can become out of balance and they'll rip themselves up. We shut them down if the farmer needs to spray his crops. Now solar, we don't know if they're producing or not. We drive around, we see the solar panel, we have not a clue, right? We have just as many reasons why they can't produce. We have maintenance, again, transmission congestion that could happen many, many miles away. We have ice or snow buildup that can cover the panel. Of course, the intensity of the sunlight, cloud cover, of course. The funny thing is, you might not know, but if you have heat buildup on a panel, the efficiency goes down by 10 to 25%. So here you have on a hot summer day when you really need the power output, they drop down. Not a great idea, but it does happen. And of course, moonlight doesn't do the trick, so. If you're thinking about putting a wind farm, if you think about locating a wind farm somewhere, obviously you want to be where the wind is. And this map depicts the highest wind in our country. And this is where all the wind farms, many, the majority of the wind farms happen right here. Now the other thing is, in Iowa, if you can kind of hold this image in your mind, you can see that Northwest Iowa has most of the wind farms. Probably knew that already. But there's some red fingers that come down toward the southeast. And in the last 8 years, maybe 10 years, we have wind turbines that are becoming more efficient that can grab and produce power from lower amounts of wind. So now we're seeing wind farms crop up east of I-35. That's why. Same thing with solar, particularly in the desert southeast, southwest, down in Florida. I mentioned the transmission lines. They really are problematic. They were designed, the backbone of the grid was designed in the 1970s and 1980s. Never had an idea that we would have all of this extra power coming in to the grid from all of these wind turbines and from solar panels. That's created a huge problem. We just cannot get the power out of the region to where it needs to be used because we don't have enough transmission. The other problem, anybody know what NIMBY stands for? Yeah. And to be fair, you know, there's a lot of pros and cons to having wind turbines in your backyard, really. I've had situations where, when I worked for the wind farm development company, and we constructed these, I've had situations where you might have an elderly couple on the farm living there. They may or may not still be doing the active farming, but they're out there living there. They're enjoying their life, and it's very peaceful. And along comes a wind farm, and somebody knocks on the door, would you like to have a wind farm, a wind turbine on your farmland? Well, let me think about it. They go out and talk to their adult children. The adult children are going, well, Dad, Mom, that sounds like a great idea. That might be $5,000 or $8,000 a year for every turbine on my land. Why don't we do that, Mom and Dad? These are like 25 and 30-year contracts. So when you get these on your land, you get revenue every year for 25 or 30 years. We've had situations where these adult children are thinking about it from the standpoint of the estate.
Yeah.
Sorry to say, sad but true, and we've had conflicts between children and parents about whether they do or don't want a wind farm in their area or a turbine on their farmland. This stuff is real, and it really does happen. Wind farms ruin lives. I don't know if they ruin lives, but they do ruin relationships sometimes. I mean, I've seen where you have a small farm community, and all of a sudden, on Sunday morning, people aren't talking to each other. Or at the high school game on Friday night. This stuff happens, and it's kind of sad. It really is. The other thing is, there's attorneys out there that have gotten really good at filing lawsuits and other court actions to bring a stop to a new project before we even get it going. I worked for 2.5 years on a project up in northeast Iowa. It was going to have 35 turbines. We took it to the Board of Supervisors at the county. We made our presentations. We got through all of that. It was approved. 28 days after the approval by the Board of Supervisors, one guy filed a lawsuit against the Board of Supervisors, indicating or alleging that they did not follow their own code and planning and zoning ordinance, and it shut it down. We held on to it for about 11 months. When it got wrapped up in the courts, we couldn't do it anymore. We had to let it go. Over $300,000 of investment in all of the soft work of getting a farm developed, and we had to walk away from it. And that happens all the time. You don't hear very much about it, but it happens all the time. So when you think about, you would think just intuitively, you'd put the wind farm where the wind is, or you would put the solar panels where the solar is most intense. But that really isn't how it works. You have to start with knowing the NIMBY side of it, figure out where can you likely put a wind farm or a solar farm, and not get so much pushback that you get a lawsuit or court action, and it causes you to have to cancel it. Environmental things take a long time, long time. And then we have that transmission problem I mentioned, and then finally down to wind speed. So it's just the reverse of what you think. You have to really figure out who would welcome the project, and then do the environmental, then the transmission, and then does it have enough wind or not. I think in my write-up that I gave you for the newsletter, I was going to talk about zero tailpipe emissions. For all the electric vehicles that are coming on now and that are being marketed and that we have rebates from the government to do, that's just a false and misleading statement. There are no zero emission tailpipe vehicles. I guess technically, yeah, it's not coming out of that tailpipe because they don't have a tailpipe. But depending on where you plug that electric vehicle in for recharging, makes a big difference about the carbon footprint for that vehicle relative to recharging the batteries. You might wonder how come Iowa's in the middle of the pack. Iowa's in the middle of the pack in terms of our carbon emissions. I'll touch on that in a moment, but just want you to be aware of it here. But if you really were into electric vehicles and you wanted to do the right thing for the planet or whatever and not have too many emissions, you would relocate your family to a green state where the power production comes from nuclear or natural gas or more wind and solar, but not coal. That's what you do. You move away from all of the coal, some of the natural gas, and you find a place to plug your vehicle in that was not going to use so much carbon. State of Iowa, the reason I wanted to point this out, number one, you can see all of the light blue areas are wind turbine wind farms throughout Iowa right now. They're scattered all over out there. Again, the transmission network that we have was never designed for that kind of power distributed to be brought in. It was really designed for the so we do have 5 coal plants left in Iowa. People don't think about this, but those 5 coal plants collectively provided about a third of our energy, electric energy in Iowa. About half of it comes from wind, and the balance basically comes from natural gas. We hear Mid-America now beginning to talk about net zero, like not having any carbon emissions in the future as a plan. They might say 2035 or 40 or 2050. I'll believe Alliant and I'll believe Mid-American when I see that they have a definitive plan to shut the coal plants off. Until they have a date and a commitment to shut the coal plants off in Iowa, I'm not going to listen to their talking points about what they're going to do to go green. They've done a great job. They've got a lot of wind. But at the end of the day, we have 5 coal plants making up a third of our energy supply with huge amounts of carbon. That's why we're in the middle of the pack nationally and not lower down. Even though we have a lot of wind, we still have these coal plants. That's just a look at the entire United States. Anybody know what, where my pointer was? Here. For example, do you know what that is? The big blue one? It's hydro. Which one? Grand Coulee. Grand Coulee out in Washington. I think it's the biggest hydro we have, if I remember. Over here you can see some green. Green is nuclear. We have green generally in the southeast. We have a little bit of solar, a lot of solar over here. And the coal is kind of here in the Midwest. But that's how we kind of look as a nation. Minnesota, you go, why do they have more solar than Iowa? They're further north. Well, they have incentives from the state of Minnesota that are promoting that and helping that move along quicker. We've not done that in Iowa. It's not good or bad. It's just a difference. We belong to the electric grid called the Mid-Continent ISO. We call it MISO, and it goes from Manitoba in the blue all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. When you think about our electric grid, my mind immediately goes to this map And I immediately know I'm in the middle of the country in the blue area for how all of the power plants are managed and brought online and taken offline to meet the demand throughout that whole region. Could you get that away? I'll lean on Lindsay. This is 1.5 minute video. Thank you. Hopefully it won't have advertising. Oh, it doesn't.
In the central U.S. and Manitoba, Canada, MISO oversees the electricity superhighway. Through the use of groundbreaking research and advanced technologies, our highly skilled employees ensure power flows reliably to more than 42 million customers. Headquartered in Carl, Indiana, with offices in Eagan, Minnesota, and Little Rock, Arkansas, MISO acts as the air traffic controller of the electricity grid. Simply put, we ensure the right amount of electricity is generated and delivered securely, dependably, and cost-effectively every minute of every day. Our work is essential. As energy generation resources evolve, MISO uses sophisticated analytical tools to plan the grid for the future. Our team works each day to operate the grid reliably and bring together buyers and sellers in one of the world's largest multi-billion-dollar energy markets. Our highly trained and talented team's commitment to our members is strong and steadfast. It's why we strive to be the most reliable, value-creating regional transmission organization.
Thank you. That would have taken me 5 minutes. Okay, quick question. This, our choir section, this is your cue, okay? If I was Steve Harvey, I would say, we asked 100 married people, if I were a coal or natural gas electric power plant, how much energy must I produce at this very given hour? And I will guarantee you, you all know the answer. I gave you a hint. It could be musical. In fact, it will be. So how much power do I have to produce this hour if I'm a coal plant or a natural gas plant? Ready? Choir? I can't look at it without having it go through my head with the melody. Do you want to do it? Nobody wants to do it. Okay. Well, thank you. Have you ever played photo hunt, where you have two photos and you're looking for differences? Okay, I don't know what it's called. Do we call it photo hunt? Okay. We have two photos. I was like a little kid with a new toy. Friday morning, I woke up and I looked at the hourly weather forecast, and I go, wow, great. Because the wind started out really high Friday morning, and then it tapered off and it got very low by the middle of the afternoon. And I thought, this is perfect. This is manna from heaven right here. This is just an engineering guy getting excited about two graphs. So when we're looking at differences, what do we see with the wind? We're going from in the morning at 7:15 a.m., in the middle of the afternoon at 2:30 last Friday. For MISO, which is that big blue area down in the middle of the country, we had 28% of the power from wind. That dropped down to 11% by the middle of the afternoon. But look what happens. Coal went from 30 to 37. Natural gas went from 26 to 31. Because something had to make up the difference, right? The wind went down, and the only way to make it all even out and not have the lights go out is we have to ramp up coal and natural gas. We cannot have renewable power on the grid without gas and coal and nuclear. The whole thing collapses if you don't have a backbone. The backbone comes from this stuff because we can't control the wind and the solar. EKG time. and then we're going to be just about out of the woods, okay? And then we're just nearing the end there. But this is 7 days across the bottom. And here we are last Friday, one 24-hour period. 24 times 365 equals what? 8760. We're getting good at this. So we have this 24-hour period, and look what happened. This is MISO, that whole blue area up and down the middle of the country. The wind came up in the morning on the green line, and it just dropped. 75% of the wind power dropped off the grid. Coal and natural gas, we had to throttle them up to make up the difference. So that's what you have happening every hour of every day. And you can see where back here, we had kind of steady wind through this period, and then it drifted down. And look at the gaps. Look at those gaps. Every time there's a gap, that means the wind went down and all the gas and coal had to be pushed forward to make up the difference. The other thing is, in our central region, solar is that little gold thing, that little hump every day. It's not moving the needle very much. It's not that big. We're getting more and more. The other important thing is nuclear. That flat line, nuclear. Nuclear plants, we turn them on and we run them. We don't shut them down. We don't call them load following. We call them base load. We turn them on and we let them go. That's the nuclear plant. And then the coal and the gas have to make up the difference. Just about through it. The other thing that we have to be aware of is because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, we have to back them up with power. Dispatchable power. And in that MISO area, there are rules that we have to follow. If you have a 100 megawatt wind farm, we can only count 15 megawatts toward meeting the peak demand. The other 85 megawatts has to come from standby generation, gas or coal. Solar does a little better. We can count 50% of its nameplate capacity to cover load, and then the other 50% has to come from gas or coal. The reason is the wind doesn't blow a lot during the summertime. Our peak demands are really high in the summertime. So we cannot cover the peak demand in the summer with wind because the wind does this all through the summer months and then picks up again from the spring, it comes down, and goes back up in the fall. All of that stuff is dynamic and it happens every hour of every day. In the background, once the lights stay on, we don't care. We're pretty apathetic. And we're kind of spoiled Americans because this stuff just happens with the 7.8 million people behind the background, keeping it all going. And then I'm just going to touch on this for your awareness and respond to questions if you have any. We hear the term carbon neutral, and we hear now more often net zero. Those are good terms. Executives from companies like to throw them out. They like to kind of use them as we're all green and we're the good guys and we're going to make the planet better. When you pull back the blanket on that, you really have to look at it closely. We don't have any certified public accountants, but Scope 3 independent emission audits are like independent audits for a financial record. And what they do is they dig down into all the company business and they document, are you really net zero in terms of not putting out emissions or are you not? And that's a science unto itself. And it's very complicated and it's not very well defined. So when you hear people talk about corporations becoming net zero, be a little bit wary. just about done. When you look from 1950 up to current, the bottom one is coal, and it peaked out about 2005, and we've retired about half of our coal fleet, maybe 40% has been retired in the last 10 to 15 years, so that coal is coming way down. Natural gas is going up. Petroleum is kind of hanging in there flat. This is for transportation. We don't use oil for electric generation. This is transportation. Nuclear is, of course, all electric power, and it's pretty flat. But the renewables, we went from 1995, we were at 7%. That renewable number I quizzed you on at the very beginning, 12%. We went from 7% 26 years ago all the way up to 12% today. Not very much. We're not moving the needle very quickly and very fast. We get now, I'm reading in newspapers and articles, that people are talking about this 12% figure being 30% within 15 years. I can't believe it. Not after 4 decades of watching this stuff in my own career. It doesn't move that quick. Not with NIMBY, not with the transmission problems, not with supply problems. We just can't get it done. I don't care how much money we throw at it. We're not going to get it done. We're not going to move it that quickly. It's just going to take time. And then carbon. Carbon emissions for the whole country. This is a forecast that gets updated every March from the Department of Energy. And this most recent March, you can see we've kind of, because of the coal plant retirements, we've kind of bent down our carbon emissions. We've kind of brought them down. And really, that was all the low-hanging fruit. That was the low-hanging fruit. It gets really tough now. It's going to be really hard to reduce the carbon output of our country a lot more in the next 20 years. And if you look at other countries, and if you use my handout sheet, you can see how you can ask, on a web search, you can ask where coal plants are being built around the globe. They're not being built here. 5 years ago was the last coal plant we began to construct. We just went cold turkey. You know why we quit constructing coal plants in the United States? This is political. They're not bankable. You can't get finance to do it because we don't know what the regulation is going to be. In the future, every 2-year election cycle, everything can change in terms of the regulations or the carbon tax that we might put on that in the future. So the bankers aren't going to loan money to build a coal plant anymore. It was an economic decision. Nobody's going to do it. The utility isn't going to take the risk to build a brand new plant and then have it throttled back because of some new regulation. I get it. That's life. That's what we're doing in the country. I'm going to leave this for your library, Mary Jo, and it was very interesting. I went through it over the weekend, and this came out Saturday, the Weekly Barron's Magazine, and I had the digital edition. I don't get the print, so I had to run the farm, so no one get it. I got the second to the last copy, but I have this red pen. Darla makes fun of me because when I read contracts, I take my red pen and I go through everything. And so I've circled all of the things. This is talking about a bright future for Exxon and Mobil as they're basically saying we're going to push green energy now, reduce our emissions. But when you read the article, it's a little different than what they're trying to say. And I took a red pen and I circled every paragraph that gives me doubt about how serious Exxon and BP are about really pursuing a greener tomorrow. You just really have to be careful. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. You got to really read between the lines. We went through all that. Again, the bottom line is we have supply in the electric grid that is not keeping pace with growing demand. And now we have demand coming from electric heat in the winter that we've never had before. And we have demand coming from electric vehicles. And it's getting really, really fragile as we go forward. And there we are, don't forget, tomorrow we're going to have coffee. We have every hour of every day. We have millions of employees, roughly 8 billion employees, looking after the natural gas supply, keep your generator going if you need it, looking after all the electric grids across the entire country, all the petroleum, all the nuclear plants, all the new renewable stuff. It's all being watched every hour of every day. It takes an army, literally, to keep it all going. I will say, we are moving in the right direction as a country. We've already come quite a long way. People don't even realize what we've done in terms of emissions. But we have a long way to go. And that'll be it. Yep.
How good are we at storing energy?
Not. A couple things with battery storage on a utility scale, large scale. It's just not cost effective yet. It's not there yet. The other really big concern is where do the raw materials come from for building batteries? This is true for electric vehicles and true for these large batteries that you might put at a wind farm or at a substation. We're not quite there. 5 and 10 years out, they're going to become more common. But we're too early in the adoption cycle of that new technology. It's going to come. The other thing is when you talk about raw materials, I think in the bill that was passed 2 months ago, I think they had money in there for new mines to be built in the U.S. So we don't have to rely on China, other Asian countries, India, for lithium and other raw materials. Because, again, I'm a farm boy, I don't want to be dependent on other people. I'd like it to come from here. But when they go to build a new mine in our country, they're going to run into NIMBY. One side of the federal government is going to be pushing like heck to get the mine built. Meanwhile, the EPA over here is going to be pushing like heck to review all of the environmental impacts of a new mine that we all agree we need, but we can't get it built. Meanwhile, Russia, but more likely China, has these mines all over, some in India, and they use much, much more dirty power production to carry out the mining than we do. Their carbon footprint is quite a bit bigger, quite a bit higher. Because we've already got more nuke, more wind, we're scaling back on our coal. Does that help? It's not an absolute answer, but it's the big picture. Yeah?
Does bird migration influence where the turbines are located?
Absolutely.
So do they take that into consideration? Because there are flyways right through that zone.
Exactly. Very good question. The question was, do bird migration paths affect where wind turbines can be? Absolutely, yes. When we get ready to build a new wind farm, we spend many, many months with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to tell them what we're doing, and we have to ultimately get a permit or their approval. We can't build it without that. So that's one check mark we have to do. We can't do them in wetlands. The Army Corps of Engineers has a problem with that. We have to stay away from wetlands, birds, bats. Bats are a problem. Eagles. On the company I worked for in the last 7 years before I retired, we had 3 operating wind farms. One morning, a technician found eagle on the ground. Immediately we reported that, because if you don't report that, it's a federal crime. So the company I worked for was very good, very conscientious. Went to Ames for the veterinarian autopsy of the bird, of the eagle. It was found that it had lead poisoning. And so we just have to kind of surmise that maybe it was disoriented. We've never had a hit with eagles, even in northeast Iowa. They don't fly into these machines normally.
You can see the blades, why would they fly?
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
the blades move slowly too, some of them.
Yeah. You're exactly right. Excellent question. There is a great deal of due diligence that has to happen before we can get a green light to do that. Yeah. Perfect. Yep.
Do you see more nuclear power being part of the solution?
I'm a guy that would love more nuke. My company, Central Iowa Power, we own 20% of Going Arnold up at Palo. The nuclear plant in Palo, before it got shut down 2 years ago after Rachel. I've been pro-nuke my entire career, and I'm hoping we can get some traction. But again, there are so many vocal minority people that are against nuke. It's just hard to get it built. There's one being built now in the southeast. I kind of think it might be Georgia, and I forgot to look it up before my talk tonight. But it's way over budget, and it's way behind schedule. That's kind of typical for these nuclear plants. It's the only one currently being built in the United States. There was another one being built, and it went bankrupt. I think they abandoned that one a few years ago. It's very hard. Now we're talking about small modular nuclear reactors that might be 75 megawatts instead of 1,500. I'm really keen on those. These little small guys that can be set around the country. I mean, we have nuclear powered subs. Why can't we do this?
So why did they shut down the Halo one if we can't build new ones?
There's one north, good question, Darla, thank you. You know, I was never able to bring Darla to all my presentations, and I didn't know you would ask her a question. At least on the trip out, I could have had a heads up, right? The nuclear plant just north of Omaha, I think it was called Fort Collins, if I remember right. And there's one, of course, that was in Palo. It was only less than 10 miles from our house. They were kind of sister plants that were built and developed about the same time, same technology. The one in Omaha and the one in Palo up here. They were among the smallest. We had 100 reactors. We had 101 or 102 reactors in the country. They were among the 5 smallest reactors. They didn't have the economy of scale to make it work. And so what happened is when we had the Fukushima problem, back in 2010 maybe, the tsunami came into Fukushima in Japan and shut that nuclear power plant down because of cooling problems and standby generation, and that's kind of what I remember about it. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission here went through all of our regulations and they tightened them down to make sure that would never happen here. That created a whole lot more capital expenditures in our existing nuclear fleet, and frankly, some of them couldn't afford to do it. It just became too onerous financially to make that capital investment, especially on a smaller plant. So the ones in up here in Cedar Rapids and the one in Omaha went down in tubes. They were too small to really be upgraded to do that. It really took out, and we lost 10% of our nuclear capacity over the last 10 years. And it really is because I'd say at least 7 of those were due to Fukushima in Japan, halfway across the world.
When was the last time there was a tsunami in Omaha?
I know. Yeah. Pardon me. Any other questions?
In general aviation, I see prop planes going to shorter propellers, what we call them scimitars, more twisted, and they're more efficient than the old big
it's shorter, but more efficient in capturing the wind power.
Same concept.
Yeah, I don't know. The trend is bigger rotors and taller towers. You might be onto something. I don't know. Do you fly?
Not on the propeller.
Do we have any private pilots or any pilots? Oh, you are? Okay. I'm a pilot, not anymore. Couldn't pass a medical. But I wanted to point out, on one of my slides, I said the tip of the blade in 12 o'clock position on a wind turbine cannot be greater than 500 feet. That's because the FAA won't allow us to have that blade tip at its highest rotational point more than 500 feet above ground level. Do you have a different idea?
No.
Oh, I thought you were questioning. Okay. And just another thought on that. Now I believe, from what I vaguely know about it, the FAA is beginning to offer, on some cases, a waiver to allow that to go a little higher. And that's beginning to happen around, I don't know what the criteria are, but up until about 3 years ago, 500 feet. Yeah.
In the last week, there was a wind turbine fire like out by Williamsburg, and there was a lot of coverage. Is this a common thing?
Boy, I didn't see that, but was it one of the big ones along the interstate, probably?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then nearby,
Oh, really? Oh, I wonder where I was. I don't know. Yeah, I was surprised. It's not common. Not common at all. I do hear about it. I don't want to absolutely say how often, but in Iowa, I don't know if it happens once every couple, 3 years, maybe. It's not very common. Good question. I'm sorry I don't have more detail, but it does happen. A tornado, a dead hit, a dead strike with a tornado, probably, if it was a larger one, what are they, E4, E5, a larger tornado might take the blades off, even though they're not spinning, it might ruin them. But generally, they're able to take a pretty good hit, either with wind or even a small tornado. It's probably not going to hurt them. Now, they may have to be shut down and fully inspected before you let them run again after a violent storm of any nature. But they're pretty tough. Yeah.
Well, given what you've said about how long it will take us to get our carbon footprint down in the United States and that other countries are
Behind us.
yeah, aren't you quite pessimistic about this longer term thing about, keeping the, you're painting a pretty, to me, pessimistic picture about our ability to.
You are very right. you are very observant. I didn't come in here to sugarcoat what's going on. I just gave it to you based on my 4 decades in the industry. And my hope, I did leave this on a kind of a negative tone, I get that. My hope is we're going to have some new technologies emerge that we don't even know about yet. They might emerge in 5 years or 10 or 15. And somewhere along the line, we're going to have a game changer technology. Darla and I have three kids, they're all in their 30s. I don't think they're going to see fossil fuels go away in their lifetime. Our grandkids, 2 1-year-olds, an 8-year-old, I think they might see it happen. But we've got a long way to go. You're absolutely right. And before I take other questions, can I ask, do you feel like I was being biased, or was I?
No. I thought you should.
I can take the criticism.
I thought you should have been more negative.
Okay.
Given the data you put.
Okay. I really honestly wanted to know, and from anyone, if you think I bent this,
No.
I really wanted to give factual information, what I've seen. There's certain things here that I would never say in front of a group of people when I was working for the wind farm folks. There's also some things that I wouldn't say when I was working for my electric co-op for 35 years in the boardroom. I came here kind of free without having to filter. And I don't mean I lie. You know, when you're an employee, you have to talk about things in a certain way. We all do it. We all did it, right? And we're all people of integrity, so you just figure out how to thread the needle, regardless of who you're talking to. I'm really happy that you felt like I was being practical and forthright.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so that graph you put up with the rising levels of demand and the mix of different energy sources is pretty striking. But what you didn't talk about, and what I wonder what your thoughts are, how do we begin to address reducing demand?
Perfect. We've done, can I just take a second to go back to a graph?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you mind? It'll just give me a little better context. Okay. I don't really have the electric demand, I don't think, over a long period of time. But what I wanted to mention was the reason this began to flatten back in 1995 and 2000 is because we're doing great work as an industry. We're being more aggressive on trying to reduce demand. Of course, some of that is lighting, went from incandescent to LEDs. Some of it is going from inefficient air conditioning to really efficient heat pumps. Refrigeration, I don't have this really on the top of my mind, but if you took a refrigerator from 1980 and compared it to today, it's minuscule today. All of our appliances use just little bits of energy compared to what they did 20 or 30 years ago. That's already beginning to flatten that curve.
What other sectors? Insulation?
Yeah.
Mass transit?
Sure, that would help. Mass transit would always help, but here again, we have the NIMBY thing to get trains built or anything like that. Electric motors, the funny thing is about electric motors, they're not a lot different. They're really not a lot different now compared to 1950 even. You know, they're sitting there doing their normal thing. And so you have commercial and industrial electric motors that we haven't figured out a breakthrough on that yet, unless somebody else has an idea. But I'm not aware of it. I don't know, I'm not answering your question very well.
I mean, those are all important things, but I think we really need to think about that side of the equation.
Yeah.
Really hard.
And I didn't mention it, MISO has what they call a demand response program. And what that means is things on my side of the meter, your side of the meter, they're hooked up to be able to be shut down, interrupted. MISO actually have in their control room, they have their fingers on all kinds of things out there throughout that whole region that can be interrupted and taken offline during a peak time. That's very common. It's not a huge amount, but it does help.
Well, I know that Toyota is working on some hydrogen-powered cars. Does hydrogen have any potential to produce electricity?
I think it absolutely does, probably in the context of fuel cells and that kind of a thing. But I'm kind of looking around, I'm ahead of my speeds on this one. And I really didn't take time after my 3.5 years sabbatical to get back into that kind of thing. But you're exactly right. I really think we're going to have some game-changing technology. But not until after 2030 or beyond. I mean, it's going to be a while. Good question, and things are going to happen on that front.
Well, you're talking about decade time frames, and you mentioned the potential of newer and more creative technologies in lots of ways. I heard the battery storage issue mentioned, and I read within the last month an MIT researcher has discovered an alternative to lithium.
Wonderful.
Which would be based on fairly common commodities in the U.S.
Wonderful.
That might be over a 10-year time frame a major factor.
Could be.
early stages.
Yeah.
When you mention long term, you're talking 20 years, you're not talking about today, you're not talking about next week.
Absolutely. That's really encouraging. And if you read those kinds of things coming out of all the research, there's a lot coming out, and something's gonna hit. Not one thing, but many things are gonna hit. The only thing I want to leave with you is, I mean, in that regard about long term, the stuff. It's like a big battleship. You can't just turn it.
That's right.
You can't just turn it. I hear, again, not political, both sides. I hear people make these statements, and I just cringe because they're acting like President Kennedy. We're going to the moon in 10 years. Well, there's a big difference, right, between a government putting a whole bunch of money into one project to get a man on the moon from one location compared to this whole national network of pipelines and transmission lines. And some president, I don't care which one, standing up and saying, by 2035, we're going to be carbon free. That's a different animal, isn't it? Compared to going to the moon. They had total control over that, right? Total control. No NIMBY stuff there. Yeah.
In support of that, I've read that all of the Chevy Suburbans and that size car that have been bought over the last couple of years more than outweighs the savings from electric vehicles that have been sold.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Over that time period.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Yep. Some kind of phenomenon. It just takes so much to move the needle, either direction. Yeah, good point. Good point.
What do we have in the way of facts about cost effectiveness, solar versus wind? It seems like our natural resources are way beyond weighted towards solar. Whether it be land areas like the Halo area versus the tiny footprint that is for a wind turbine at this point in time, as well as the inner workings.
Okay. Let me just make sure I understand. So you're wanting clarity on how does solar compare to wind in terms of economics, and given the fact that what you said, it takes a lot more land, like up at Palo, that's a lot of farmland.
Acres and acres.
Hundreds and hundreds of acres of farmland going to be covered up and taken out.
It's about the money that we're putting into either or source of energy, and it seems like it's quite lopsided.
Yeah, it really is lopsided. The wind really took hold. The wind projects took hold in Iowa, and I'm trying to kind of, in my own mind, back in the day, 15 years ago when this all began, solar, it wasn't, we were too far north of the latitude, and so the efficiency wasn't there. Now solar panels are becoming more efficient, so we're going to find them in Iowa. Not, just in the last 3 years it's beginning to happen. I'm concerned about that too, the land area. The thing about, it's hard to say absolutely the economic difference, because with solar, even though that's very small, it happens during a time when the energy from it is more valuable because it's during a peak time. Wind tends to happen during an off-peak time when we don't really need it so much. From an engineering point of view, we need to kind of back off the wind and put more solar in to get a balance. But this whole thing about land use is a very, very important issue.
We've had a very good discussion now, but I think you're ready to go.
Oh, I don't care. Honestly, I don't have any. Yeah, no, I'm really yield to you guys.
Yeah.
If there's questions, I'll hang out.
Yeah.
I'll yield to you guys. So, I really appreciate your attention. This was a lot of water to
I
carry.
think the discussion's been tremendously.
I appreciate it all. I really do, because I was so concerned about how to make it relevant, and I hope I was able to make it relevant.